They said I was just a relic they wanted to move past, a burden soon to be discarded. The day my daughter-in-law whispered to my son, "Sell your mother's land, she won't live long," was the day I felt truly invisible. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. Every morning in my small Queens apartment, the muffled sounds of the city filtered in. The honks, the distant chatter from the subway below, the decay of autumn leaves pressed against cracked windows. I shuffled to the kitchen, my knees aching like the old oak tree on the land I fought to keep. It was my legacy, my pride. Yet here I was, ignored messages from my son, canceled dinners, and the cold echo of a house suddenly too quiet. The smell of coffee used to comfort me. Now it just reminded me of all the empty mornings I spent waiting for phone calls that never came. My arthritis had gotten worse over the summer, but when I mentioned it during our last brief conversation, my son just said, "Oh, that's tough, Mom," before quickly changing the subject to his new promotion. I remember when he used to call me every Sunday after church. We'd talk for hours about everything and nothing. He'd tell me about his dreams, his fears, his hopes for the future. Now, our conversations lasted maybe 5 minutes, and half of that was him asking if I was doing okay financially, or if I needed anything. What I needed was my son. What I got were polite check-ins that felt more like obligation than love. The apartment felt smaller each day. The walls seemed to close in, decorated with family photos that now felt like monuments to a life that was slowly slipping away from me. Photos of birthday parties where I was the one behind the camera, Christmas mornings where I was the one cooking for everyone else, graduations where I was the proud grandmother cheering from the back row. But the hardest part wasn't the loneliness. It was the slow realization that I had become invisible in my own family's story. When they made plans, I wasn't included. When they made decisions, I wasn't consulted. When they talked about the future, I wasn't part of it. The land upstate had been in our family for 3 generations. My grandfather bought it with money he saved working double shifts at the steel mill in Pittsburgh. My father built the small cabin there with his own hands, board by board, nail by nail. My husband and I spent our honeymoon in that cabin, planning our future under the stars that seemed endless back then. Every summer, we'd take the kids there. My son would catch fireflies in mason jars, and we'd roast marshmallows over the fire pit my husband dug. The smell of wood smoke and pine needles, the sound of the creek running behind the property, the way the morning light filtered through the birch trees. These memories were woven into the fabric of who I was. I always assumed the land would stay in the family forever. I pictured my grandchildren playing in the same creek, catching the same fireflies, building their own memories under those same stars. It never occurred to me that my own son would see it as just another asset to be liquidated. The first crack in my illusion came 6 months ago. I had made Sunday dinner: pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans from my small garden on the fire escape. I'd spent all morning cooking, setting the table with the good china, lighting candles. I was so excited to have everyone together. At 4:30, my phone rang. "Mom, we're not going to make it today. Something came up." No apology, no explanation, no suggestion to reschedule. Just disappointment served cold through a crackling phone line. I sat at that table for 2 hours, watching the candles burn down, watching the food get cold. I kept thinking they might still show up, that maybe they were just running late. But they never came. I finally put everything away and ate a sandwich alone in front of the television. That became the pattern. Canceled plans, forgotten birthdays, unanswered texts. I started to feel like I was bothering them just by existing. When I called to check in, their voices carried that particular tone of barely concealed irritation. When I asked about family events, I got vague responses or changed subjects. The money requests started subtly. "Mom, could you help us out this month? Just until I get my bonus." Or, "Grandma, The kids need new school supplies, and we're a little tight. I never said no. How could I? They were my family. If they needed help, I would find a way to provide it. I had saved diligently for retirement. Nothing extravagant, but enough to live comfortably and maybe leave something for my son and grandchildren. Every request for money meant dipping into those savings, but I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was investing in my relationships. Looking back now, I can see how I was being conditioned. Each favor made the next one seem reasonable. Each gift created an expectation for the next one. I was training them to see me as a resource rather than a person. The amount of money involved grew steadily. First, it was a few $100s for groceries or utilities. Then, it was $1,000 for car repairs. Then $2,000 for medical bills. Then $5,000 for a down payment on a new house. The numbers kept climbing, and my savings kept shrinking, but I kept giving because I was terrified of what would happen if I stopped. What would happen was exactly what I feared most. They would disappear from my life entirely. My daughter-in-law, Sandra, had never liked me. I knew this from the beginning, but I tried so hard to win her over. I complimented her cooking, even though it was terrible. I bought expensive gifts for her birthday and Christmas. I babysat whenever she asked, even when my back was killing me. I bit my tongue when she made snide comments about my outdated clothes or my old-fashioned opinions. Nothing was ever enough. She had this way of making me feel small without saying anything directly cruel. She would smile sweetly while delivering little cuts. "Oh, Eleanor, you don't need to worry about that. It's complicated." Or, "Maybe you should rest instead of helping. You look tired." But it was the conversations I wasn't meant to hear that really opened my eyes. One evening, I was visiting to watch my granddaughter while they went out. I had fallen asleep on the couch watching a movie with little Emma. I woke up to the sound of Sandra's voice coming from the kitchen. She was on the phone with someone, probably her sister, and she was talking about me. "She's getting so needy," Sandra was saying. "Always calling, always wanting to be included in everything. And the way she shows up with those random gifts. It's like she's trying to buy our affection." My heart stopped. I held my breath, straining to hear more. The worst part is that Tom feels guilty about everything. He keeps talking about how much she's done for us. But honestly, that's what mothers are supposed to do. And now she's getting older and more demanding, and I just don't have the patience for it. There was a pause while the person on the other end responded. "I know, right? And she owns that property upstate that's just sitting there doing nothing. Tom says it's probably worth at least $500,000 now, maybe more with all the development happening in that area. We could pay off our mortgage and maybe even buy that cabin cruiser Tom's been wanting." Another pause. "Well, she's 73. How much longer can she really have? And it's not like she's using the land for anything. She hasn't been up there in years. It's just wasted potential." I felt like I was going to be sick. This woman was discussing my death like a business opportunity. She was calculating the value of my property while I was sleeping 10 feet away, watching her daughter. But the worst part was yet to come. The next week, I was having lunch with my neighbor Ruth at the little diner on Northern Boulevard. Ruth is one of those people who knows everything that happens in the neighborhood. She has a network of friends and acquaintances that rivals the FBI. "Eleanor," she said, stirring sugar into her coffee, "I heard something troubling yesterday, and I wasn't sure if I should tell you." My stomach clenched. "What is it?" "My friend Mary works at the real estate office on Queens Boulevard. She said your son came in last week asking about getting an appraisal on some property upstate. When she asked if he was looking to sell, he said he was exploring options for his mother's land." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat there staring at Ruth, trying to process what she was telling me. My son, my only child, was shopping around behind my back, getting ready to sell the land that meant everything to me. "Are you sure?" I asked, though I could hear the truth in my own voice. Ruth nodded sadly. Mary said he seemed pretty serious about it. He had all the property information with him, the deed number, the exact location, everything. I made it through lunch somehow, but as soon as I got home, I called my son. Tom, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Sure, Mom, what's up? Are you thinking about selling the land upstate? There was a long pause. Too long. Mom, where did you hear that? That doesn't matter, are you? Another pause. Look, Sandra and I have just been discussing options. The property taxes are getting expensive and you never use it anymore. You thought maybe you'd sell my land without talking to me about it first? It's not like that, Mom. We were just getting information. We weren't going to do anything without discussing it with you. But I could hear the lie in his voice, the same tone he used when he was 12 and I caught him stealing cookies from the jar. Tom, that land is not for sale. It's staying in the family. Mom, be practical. You haven't been up there in 3 years. The cabin needs work, the taxes are killing us, and the money could really help with Emma's college fund. Emma is 8 years old, and since when are her college expenses my responsibility? Since you're her grandmother and you love her? The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost fell for it again. Almost. Tom, I love that little girl with all my heart, but I'm not selling my land to pay for her college. If you need money for her education, you can start saving like every other parent. Mom, you're being unreasonable. No, Tom, I'm being clear. The land is not for sale. I hung up before he could respond, but my hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about everything that had happened over the past few months. The canceled dinners, the constant money requests, the cold conversations, the way Sandra looked at me like I was an inconvenience, the real estate appraisal. And then I remembered something else Ruth had told me. She said Mary mentioned that Sandra had been in the office too, asking questions about how quickly a property sale could go through once the owner passed away. Once the owner passed away, they weren't just planning to sell my land, they were planning to sell it after I died. They were counting on my death like it was a retirement plan. I got up and made myself a cup of tea, but my hands were trembling so badly that I dropped the cup. It shattered on the kitchen floor. My favorite cup, the one my husband had bought me for our anniversary 30 years ago. As I knelt there picking up the pieces, I finally let myself cry. I cried for the daughter-in-law who saw me as an obstacle. I cried for the son who had become a stranger. I cried for the grandchildren who were being taught to see me as a means to an end. But most of all, I cried for the woman I had allowed myself to become, invisible, disposable, valuable only for what I could provide. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. I was at my doctor's appointment, a routine checkup that I had mentioned to Sandra in case she wanted to pick up Emma from school afterward. When I got home, there was a voicemail waiting. Hi, Eleanor. It's Sandra. Listen, I know you're at the doctor today, and I was wondering if you could ask about getting a letter about your health situation. Tom and I have been talking to a financial planner, and he said it would help with some estate planning if we had documentation about your prognosis. Nothing dramatic, just something official about your general condition. Thanks. I played that message 3 times, each time feeling more sick to my stomach. She was asking me to get a medical evaluation of how long I had to live. She wanted documentation of my mortality for her financial planning. I called Tom immediately. Did you know Sandra left me a voicemail asking me to get a letter from my doctor about my life expectancy? Silence. Tom? Mom, I think you misunderstood what she was asking for. I have the voicemail, Tom. I can play it for you. Look, our financial planner suggested that it might be helpful to have some general health information for planning purposes. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. You're planning my funeral while I'm still alive. Mom, you're being dramatic. No, Tom, I'm being awake for the first time in months. I hung up on him again, but this time I didn't feel upset. I felt angry. And anger, I was starting to realize, was much more useful than sadness. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Ruth had recommended him, Luis Rodriguez, a man who specialized in elder law and estate planning. His office was in a small building in Astoria, and when I walked in, I felt like I was taking the first real step I'd taken in years. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk, "what can I help you with today?" I told him everything: the money requests, the real estate appraisal, the voicemail about my health, the conversation I overheard about my death being a business opportunity. He listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he set down his pen and looked at me with kind but serious eyes. "Mrs. Patterson, how is your name listed on the deed to this property?" "It's just in my name. My husband passed away 8 years ago, and we had the deed transferred to me." "And your son has no legal claim to the property currently?" "Not unless something happens to me." He nodded. "What would you like to happen with this property?" "I want to protect it. I want to make sure no one can sell it without my permission while I'm alive. And I want to make sure it goes to my grandchildren when I die, not to my son and daughter-in-law." "We can do that," he said. "There are several options. We could set up a trust, or we could add your grandchildren as joint owners with rights of survivorship. We could also add your own name as a life tenant, which would give you exclusive rights to use the property during your lifetime. What would you recommend?" "Given what you've told me about the family dynamics, I think the strongest protection would be to add yourself and your grandchildren as joint owners. That way, all parties would need to agree to any sale, and you would retain full use of the property during your lifetime." "How quickly can we do this?" "If you can get me the current deed and property information, I can have the paperwork ready by the end of the week." I left his office feeling something I hadn't felt in months: hope. That weekend, I drove up to the property for the first time in over a year. The cabin looked smaller than I remembered, and there were some repairs that needed to be done, but the land was as beautiful as ever. The creek was running high from the recent rain, and the birch trees were just starting to turn their autumn gold. I walked the old paths, remembering summers with my children, winters when my husband and I would come up just to enjoy the quiet. The property taxes were expensive, as Tom had pointed out, but they weren't unmanageable. And the land was appreciating in value every year. If anything, it was a good investment. More importantly, it was home in a way that my Queens apartment had never been. This was where my roots were, where my history lived, where I felt most like myself. I spent the night in the cabin, something I hadn't done alone since my husband died. It was peaceful in a way I had forgotten was possible. No phone calls, no requests for money, no walking on eggshells around Sandra's moods. Just me and the sound of the creek and the wind in the trees. The next morning, I called Luis from the cabin's landline. "I want to move forward with the joint ownership," I told him. "Excellent. Do you want to let your family know what you're doing?" "Not yet. Let's get the paperwork filed first." 2 weeks later, it was done. Emma and Jake, my grandchildren, were now joint owners of the property along with me. Tom's name was nowhere on the deed. If anything happened to me, the property would go directly to the kids, held in trust until they turned 21. I felt like I could breathe again, but I wasn't prepared for what happened next. 3 days after the new deed was filed, my phone rang. It was Tom, and he was angrier than I'd heard him in years. "Mom, what the hell did you do?" "I protected my property. You went behind our backs and screwed us out of our inheritance." "Tom, that property was never your inheritance. It was mine to do with as I pleased." "We counted on that money, Mom. Sandra's already been looking at houses, and we told Emma's dance teacher we could afford the advanced program because we thought." "You thought I'd be dead soon and you could sell my land." "That's not what I said." "But it's what you meant." There was a long pause. When Tom spoke again, His voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. "Mom, if this is how you want to play it, fine. But don't expect us to keep coming around acting like everything's normal when you've made it clear you don't trust us." "I don't trust you, Tom. You've given me every reason not to. We'll see how you feel when you're sitting alone in that apartment with no family to visit you." He hung up, and I knew he meant it as a threat. But for the first time in months, the thought of being alone didn't terrify me. Being alone was starting to sound better than being used. The retaliation was swift and deliberate. First, Sandra posted a long message on Facebook about toxic parents who manipulate their children with money and then claim to be victims. She didn't mention me by name, but everyone in our extended family knew exactly who she was talking about. Then Tom changed his phone number without telling me. When I tried to call to talk to my grandchildren, I got a disconnected message. Finally, Sandra sent me a text message that made everything crystal clear. "Eleanor, we've decided that it's best for our family to take a break from visits until you can learn to respect our boundaries and our decisions. The children will not be available for calls or visits until further notice." They had cut me off from my grandchildren. The two people I loved most in the world were now being used as weapons against me. I spent 3 days crying. Then I got angry again. I showed up at Emma's school on Monday afternoon. I knew what time Sandra usually picked her up, and I wanted to see my granddaughter, even if it was just for a moment. When Emma came out of the building and saw me, her face lit up the way it always did. "Grandma Eleanor!" She ran over and threw her arms around me, and for a moment, everything felt normal again. "Hi, sweetheart. How was school?" "It was good. We learned about butterflies, and I got to feed the class hamster and—" "Emma, get in the car. Now!" Sandra's voice cut through Emma's excited chatter like a knife. She was standing by her SUV with her arms crossed and a look of pure fury on her face. "Hi, Sandra," I said calmly. "You need to leave. Now. I was just saying hello to my granddaughter. Your granddaughter is not your concern anymore." "Emma," I said, "get in the car." Emma looked confused and scared. She looked back and forth between us, not understanding why her grandmother and mother were talking to each other like enemies. "But I want to talk to Grandma," Emma said in a small voice. "No, get in the car right now, or you're losing screen time for a week." Emma's lower lip started to tremble, but she obeyed. As Sandra strapped her into her car seat, I could see Emma watching me through the window with big, confused eyes. Before getting in the driver's seat, Sandra walked over to me. "If you ever show up here again, I'm calling the police and filing a restraining order. Do you understand me?" "Sandra, she's my granddaughter." "She's my daughter, and you've made it very clear that you care more about your property than about your family. So now you can have your precious land, and we'll have our family. Without you." She got in the car and drove away, but not before I saw Emma pressing her little hand against the window, still looking back at me. I stood there in the school parking lot for 20 minutes, watching other grandparents pick up their grandchildren, seeing the hugs and smiles and easy affection that I had lost. That night, I called Luis. "They've cut me off from my grandchildren," I told him. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. Unfortunately, parents have a legal right to control access to their children, even from grandparents. Is there anything I can do?" In New York, grandparents can petition for visitation rights in certain circumstances, but it's an uphill battle, especially when the parents are married and living together. "So they can just take my grandchildren away from me because they're angry about the property?" "Legally, yes. I'm sorry." I hung up feeling more defeated than I had since this whole nightmare began. Protecting my land had cost me my grandchildren. I had won the battle but lost the war. But then something unexpected happened. 2 weeks later, I was at the grocery store picking up vegetables for a soup I was making. Cooking for one again, but trying to take care of myself anyway. As I was checking out, someone tapped me on the shoulder. It was my neighbor Maria, who lived in the apartment below mine. "Eleanor, I have something for you." She handed me a folded piece of paper. Emma asked me to give this to you. She and her friend from school were playing in the courtyard yesterday, and she saw me coming back from work. She asked if I knew you, and when I said yes, she asked me to give you this. My hands were shaking as I unfolded the paper. It was a drawing of two stick figures holding hands under a tree. At the bottom, in Emma's careful second-grade handwriting, it said, "I miss you, Grandma." I started crying right there in the checkout line. She also asked me to tell you that she loves you, and she doesn't understand why she can't see you anymore. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight Sandra and Tom anymore. I wasn't going to show up at school or try to call or text or beg for access to my grandchildren. But I also wasn't going to give up on them. I opened a savings account in Emma and Jake's names and started putting money away every month. Not for their parents, but for them directly. College funds that could only be accessed by them when they turned 18. I wrote letters to each of them, not to be sent now, but to be given to them someday when they were old enough to understand what had happened and why. I told them how much I loved them, how proud I was of them, how sorry I was that adult problems had come between us. And I started to build a life that didn't revolve around waiting for their phone calls or approval. The first thing I did was sign up for a watercolor painting class at the senior center in Astoria. I hadn't painted since college, but I remembered loving it. The instructor, a patient woman named Patricia, helped me remember how to see color and light and shadow. My first attempts were terrible, but it didn't matter. For 2 hours twice a week, I lost myself in mixing colors and trying to capture the way light fell across the still life arrangements Patricia set up. Then, I joined a book club that met at the Queens Public Library. 12 women ranging in age from 60 to 85, all of us eager to discuss everything from Jane Austen to Toni Morrison to the latest mystery novels. It had been years since I'd had conversations about ideas rather than money or family drama. I started taking walks in Flushing Meadows Park, something I'd always said I wanted to do but never made time for. The park was beautiful in the fall, with the trees turning color and the lake reflecting the changing sky. I met other walkers, people who became familiar faces and then acquaintances and then friends. Ruth, my neighbor who had first warned me about Tom's real estate inquiries, became my closest companion. We grocery shopped together, went to matinee movies, tried new restaurants in the neighborhood. She had been through her own family struggles. A daughter who lived across the country and called twice a year. A son who asked for money more often than he asked how she was doing. "The thing about being older," Ruth said one day as we sat in her kitchen drinking coffee and working on a jigsaw puzzle, "is that you finally have permission to stop trying to earn love. You can just be yourself and see who sticks around." "What if no one sticks around?" I asked. "Then you'll know they weren't worth having around in the first place." For the first time in my adult life, I stopped feeling guilty about spending money on myself. I bought new clothes that fit properly and made me feel confident. I got my hair cut and colored at a real salon instead of the discount place I'd been going to for years. I bought books I wanted to read and didn't worry about whether they were on sale. I upgraded my cable package to include the premium movie channels. I bought good coffee and real cream instead of powdered creamer. I started eating at the small restaurants in my neighborhood instead of always cooking at home or getting takeout from the cheapest places. These weren't extravagant purchases, but they were investments in my own comfort and happiness. For years, I had been so focused on providing for everyone else that I had forgotten to take care of myself. The changes weren't just financial. I started speaking up more, expressing my opinions instead of always agreeing to keep the peace. In book club, I defended books that other people criticized. At the senior center, I suggested activities and field trips. With Ruth, I shared my real thoughts instead of always asking about her problems. I was becoming myself again, not Tom's mother or Sandra's burden or Emma and Jake's walking ATM, but Eleanor Patterson, a woman with her own interests and opinions and dreams. But the biggest change came 6 months after the deed transfer, when Sandra made one last attempt to get control of my property. I received a certified letter from a law firm in Manhattan. Sandra had filed papers claiming that I was mentally incompetent and requesting that Tom be appointed as my legal guardian. The letter stated that my erratic behavior and poor financial decisions showed that I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. My hands were shaking as I read the document, but not with fear, with rage. They were trying to have me declared incompetent so they could control my money and property. Sandra had found a lawyer willing to claim that my decision to protect my own land was evidence of mental illness. I called Luis immediately. "This is a serious matter," he said after I read him the letter over the phone. "But it's also completely without merit. You're going to need to respond formally, and you'll need medical documentation of your mental competency. How do we fight this? We get you evaluated by a geriatric psychiatrist who will testify that you are completely capable of making your own decisions. We document all the reasons you had for changing the deed, and we expose this for what it is, a money grab disguised as concern for your welfare." The evaluation took place the following week. Dr. Sarah Goldstein, a psychiatrist who specialized in elder care, spent 3 hours with me, asking questions about current events, my financial situation, my medical history, and my family relationships. "Mrs. Patterson," she said at the end of our session, "you are clearly competent to make your own financial and legal decisions. In fact, your decision to protect your property shows excellent judgment and planning skills. I'll be happy to provide written documentation of my evaluation." But I wasn't content to just defend myself. I was ready to go on the offensive. "Luis, can we find out who's paying for Sandra's lawyer?" "Why do you ask?" "Because if she's using my money I gave them over the years, to hire a lawyer to have me declared incompetent, I want that documented in court." Luis smiled for the first time since this mess began. "Eleanor, I think you're going to do very well at the hearing." The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in November. I arrived at the courthouse wearing my best dress and the pearl necklace my husband had given me for our 25th anniversary. I felt calm in a way that surprised me. Sandra and Tom were there with their lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who kept checking his phone. Sandra wouldn't look at me, but Tom met my eyes for a moment across the courtroom. I saw confusion there, and maybe a little shame. Their lawyer presented his case first, claiming that my property transfer showed impaired judgment and vulnerability to manipulation. He suggested that I had been confused about the legal implications of my actions. Then Luis stood up. "Your Honor, Mrs. Patterson is here today to defend herself against completely meritorious charges brought by family members who are upset that she protected her own property from being sold without her consent." He called Dr. Goldstein to testify about my mental competency. Then he called me to the stand. "Mrs. Patterson, why did you change the deed on your property?" "Because I learned that my son and daughter-in-law were planning to sell it without my permission." "How did you learn this?" "I told the court about the real estate appraisal, the conversations I overheard, the voicemail asking me to get medical documentation of my life expectancy." "And why did you add your grandchildren's names to the deed instead of your son's?" "Because I wanted the property to stay in the family, but I had lost trust in my son's willingness to respect my wishes." Sandra's lawyer tried to make me look confused and vindictive during cross-examination, but I answered every question clearly and calmly. When he suggested that I was being manipulated by outside influences, I looked directly at Sandra. "Your Honor, the only people who have tried to manipulate me are the people who requested this hearing." The judge took less than 10 minutes to deliberate. "This petition is denied. Mrs. Patterson is clearly competent to manage her own affairs. Furthermore, the court finds that this petition appears to have been filed in bad faith as an attempt to gain control of property that the petitioners are not legally entitled to. Mrs. Patterson, you are free to manage your property and your finances as you see fit." Sandra was crying as we left the courtroom, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage. Tom put his arm around her. But he looked back at me one more time before they disappeared into the elevator. That night, Ruth and I went out to dinner at a nice Italian restaurant in Little Italy to celebrate. I ordered a bottle of wine and pasta with seafood, and we toasted to legal victories and second chances. "How do you feel?" Ruth asked. "Free," I said. "For the first time in years, I feel completely free." Oh, but the story didn't end there. 2 months later, on a cold January morning, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, I heard a small voice that I hadn't heard in almost a year. "Grandma, it's Emma." My heart stopped. "Emma, sweetheart, how are you calling me?" "I'm at my friend Madison's house and I asked her mom if I could call you. I remember your phone number because you taught me to remember it in case of emergencies." "Is everything okay? Are you hurt?" "No, I'm okay." "But Grandma, I miss you so much. I don't understand why Mom says I can't see you anymore. She says you're angry at us, but I don't think that's true." I was crying, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm not angry at you. I love you more than anything in the world." "Then why can't I see you?" "How do you explain adult financial disputes to an 8-year-old? How do you tell a child that her mother is using her as a weapon?" Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements that have nothing to do with how much they love their children and grandchildren. I love you and Jake so much, Emma. I love you too, Grandma. And Jake misses you too, but he's too little to understand. How is Jake? He's good. He learned to ride a bike without training wheels. And Grandma, I drew you another picture, but I don't know how to give it to you. Maybe you can save it for me until we can see each other again. When will that be? I don't know, sweetheart, but I believe it will happen someday. Madison's mother came on the phone then, apologizing for Emma using their phone without permission. "Please don't apologize," I told her. "This call means everything to me." "Emma talks about you all the time," Madison's mom said quietly. "I think she misses you very much." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen and cried for an hour. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief. Emma still loved me. She still missed me. Whatever Sandra had told her, she didn't believe it. That phone call changed everything for me. Instead of feeling defeated by the separation from my grandchildren, I felt hopeful. Emma had found a way to reach me when she needed to. She was resilient and resourceful, and someday she would be old enough to make her own decisions about who she wanted in her life. I started keeping a journal for both Emma and Jake, writing entries about my daily life, my thoughts about them, stories about their father when he was young, and memories of their grandfather. Someday, I would give them these journals so they could understand what had happened and know that I had never stopped loving them. I also started a tradition of buying them birthday and Christmas gifts, carefully wrapping them and storing them in a closet in my bedroom. When we were reunited, they would have years' worth of presents waiting for them. But the most important thing I did was stop waiting for my life to begin again. I had spent months in a holding pattern, organizing everything around the hope that Tom and Sandra would change their minds and let me back into the family. Now, I understood that I couldn't waste any more time waiting for other people's approval to be happy. I took a trip to Vermont that spring, staying at a bed and breakfast near a lake where my husband and I had vacationed early in our marriage. I hadn't traveled alone since he died, and I was nervous about it, but it turned out to be exactly what I needed. I spent 3 days hiking easy trails, reading by the lake, and eating meals at small local restaurants. I struck up conversations with other travelers and locals. I bought myself a beautiful handmade scarf at a craft shop and didn't worry about whether it was too expensive. On the last morning of my trip, I was sitting on the porch of the bed and breakfast drinking coffee and watching the sun rise over the lake when I realized something profound. I was happy. Not pretending to be happy, not hoping for happiness, but genuinely, completely happy in that moment. I had spent so many years measuring my happiness by other people's approval that I had forgotten what it felt like to be content with my own company. When I got back to Queens, I made another major decision. I listed my Queens apartment and started looking for a smaller place closer to my upstate property. Not on the property itself. The cabin was too small and isolated for year-round living, but in the small town nearby. I found a perfect 2-bedroom house with a garden and a view of the mountains. It was walking distance from a library, a grocery store, and several restaurants. The neighbors were friendly, and there was a community center that offered classes and activities for seniors. The move took 2 months to complete, but by the end of summer, I was settled in my new home. I set up a painting studio in the 2nd bedroom and planted a vegetable garden in the backyard. I joined the local historical society and started volunteering at the animal shelter. Ruth visited regularly, taking the train up from the city. We would spend weekends working in my garden, exploring local antique shops and cooking elaborate meals together. She was thinking about moving upstate too, tired of the noise and expense of the city. "You look different," she told me during one of her visits. "Younger, somehow." "I feel different," I said. "I feel like myself again." The biggest test of my new independence came that Christmas. For the first time in 30 years, I didn't cook Christmas dinner for my family. Instead, I volunteered to serve dinner at the community center for people who didn't have family to celebrate with. Ruth came up from the city to volunteer with me, and we spent the day serving food, playing games with kids, and listening to stories from elderly people who reminded me how lucky I was to have my health and my freedom. It was one of the best Christmases I could remember. But on Christmas night, as I was wrapping up leftovers from the community dinner, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick it up. It was Tom. "Mom?" "Hello, Tom. Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas to you, too." There was a long pause. I could hear voices in the background, Sandra and the kids, probably cleaning up from their own celebration. "Mom, I've been thinking about calling you for months." "Oh?" "Sandra and we're having some problems, money problems. The mortgage is behind, and Emma needs some medical work done on her teeth and—" He trailed off, and I knew what was coming next. Even after everything that had happened, even after the legal battle and the year of silence, he was calling to ask me for money. "Tom," I said gently, "I'm not going to give you money." "Mom, please. I know we've had our differences, but the kids need parents who can support them without depending on their grandmother's savings. And they need parents who don't use them as weapons when they don't get their way. It's not like that." "It's exactly like that. Tom, I would do anything for Emma and Jake, but I won't enable you and Sandra to continue treating me like an ATM. So you're just going to let your grandchildren suffer?" "I'm going to let their parents figure out how to take care of them, like every other parent in the world." There was another long pause. "I guess I understand why Sandra calls you selfish." "Good night, Tom." I hung up and turned off my phone, but instead of feeling upset, I felt proud. A year ago, I would have transferred money before the conversation was over. Tonight, I had held my boundaries without wavering. That spring brought an unexpected gift. I was working in my garden when a car pulled into my driveway. A young woman got out, followed by a teenage boy who looked familiar. It took me a moment to recognize Jake. My grandson was now 13 years old, tall and gangly, with his father's eyes and his grandfather's stubborn jaw. The young woman introduced herself as Kelly, Tom's girlfriend. Apparently, Tom and Sandra had divorced 6 months earlier, and Tom had been granted partial custody of the kids. "Jake has been asking about you for months," Kelly said. "Tom finally agreed to let me bring him to see you." Jake hung back at first, shy and uncertain. But when I showed him the garden and told him he could pick whatever vegetables he wanted for lunch, he started to relax. "Grandma, why did you disappear?" he asked as we pulled carrots from the soil. "I didn't disappear, sweetheart. Your mom decided that you couldn't see me anymore because she was angry about some grown-up stuff." That's what Dad said. He said Mom made some bad decisions. I didn't want to criticize Sandra in front of Jake, so I just said, Sometimes adults make mistakes. The important thing is that I never stopped loving you and Emma." "Where is Emma?" I asked. "She's with Mom this weekend, but she talks about you all the time. She still has all those pictures she drew for you." Kelly and Jake stayed for lunch and most of the afternoon. Jake helped me paint a birdhouse, and I showed him photo albums from when his father was young. When it was time to leave, Jake hugged me tight and said, "Can I come back soon?" "Anytime your dad says it's okay," I told him. Tom called me that evening. Kelly said Jake had a good time today. He did. He's grown so much. "Mom, I owe you an apology. Sandra told me a lot of things about what happened with the property and the court case, and I believed her because it was easier than admitting I had screwed up." "What changed your mind?" "The divorce, partly, and seeing how she tried to turn the kids against me when I left. I started to understand what she had done to you." "Tom, I never wanted to fight with you. I just wanted to protect something that was important to me. I know that now. And Mom, I'm sorry about the money. All those times we asked you for help when we should have been figuring things out ourselves. We got so used to having you solve our problems that we forgot how to be responsible for ourselves. Are you doing better now?" "We're getting there. I got a promotion at work, and Kelly is helping me learn to budget better. We're not rich, but we're not depending on anyone else either. I'm proud of you for figuring it out." "Mom, would it be okay if Jake visits you regularly, and maybe Emma when she's ready?" "I would love that more than anything." "And Mom, I know I don't deserve it after everything that happened, but I miss you. I miss having you in my life." "I miss you too, son." It wasn't a complete reconciliation. There was still too much hurt and broken trust for that. But it was a beginning. Jake started visiting every other weekend, and slowly, carefully, Tom and I began to rebuild a relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt. Emma took longer. Sandra had filled her head with stories about how I had abandoned the family and stolen money that belonged to her parents. But Jake worked on her gradually, showing her photos from his visits, telling her about the gifts I had saved for her, sharing stories I had told him about their father's childhood. Finally, on Emma's 10th birthday, Tom brought both kids to visit. Emma was still wary at first, but when I gave her the box of wrapped presents I had been collecting for 2 years, her face lit up with the smile I remembered. "You saved all these for me?" "I saved them because I love you, and I wanted you to know I was thinking about you even when we couldn't see each other." That weekend, Emma asked if she could see my upstate property. The 3 of us drove up to the cabin, and I watched my grandchildren explore the creek where their father had played, climb the same trees, catch fireflies in mason jars just like their family had done for generations. "Grandma," Emma said as we roasted marshmallows over the fire pit, "I'm sorry I believed Mom when she said you didn't care about us anymore." "Sweetheart, you were young, and you were trying to understand a complicated situation. You don't need to apologize for anything. But I should have known you wouldn't just stop loving us. Emma, love doesn't disappear just because people can't see each other. I loved you every single day, even when we were apart. Will you always love us? Always and forever." That night, sleeping in the cabin with my grandchildren in the loft bed their father had slept in as a child, I felt like my family had finally been restored. Not to what it was before, but to what it was meant to be. But the most important healing was yet to come. Last month, Sandra called me. She had been struggling since the divorce, working 2 jobs to make ends meet, trying to manage Emma's schedule on her own. Her voice on the phone was small and tired, nothing like the confident, sharp woman who had made my life miserable for so many years. "Eleanor, I know I don't have any right to ask you this, but Emma has been asking if she can spend some vacation time with you this summer. She talks about the property upstate and how much she loves it there. She's welcome anytime, Sandra. I owe you an apology, a lot of apologies, actually." I waited. "I was jealous of you. of how much Tom loved you, of how excited the kids got when they were going to see you, of the fact that you had this beautiful property and all this history. I felt like I was competing with you for my own family's attention. Sandra, no, let me finish. I convinced myself that you were the problem, that you were manipulative and controlling, because it was easier than admitting that I was threatened by a 73-year-old woman. And then when you changed the deed, I saw it as an attack instead of what it really was, you protecting yourself from people who didn't deserve your trust. It was a difficult time for everyone. Eleanor, I tried to have you declared incompetent so I could get control of your money and your property. That's not difficult. That's evil. I can't believe I stooped that low. What's important is that you recognize it now. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I'm sorry, and I want you to be in Emma and Jake's lives. They need their grandmother. Sandra, I forgive you. The words surprised me as much as they surprised her. I hadn't planned to say them, but as soon as they were out of my mouth, I knew they were true. You do? Yes. We all made mistakes during that time. What matters is that we learn from them and do better going forward. Sandra was crying now. Thank you. I don't deserve it, but thank you. Sandra, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you okay? Are you and Emma doing all right financially? We're managing. It's tight, but we're managing. If you ever need help with something specific for Emma, school supplies, medical bills, things like that, you can call me. Not to bail you out of poor decisions, but to help my granddaughter when she needs it. Eleanor, after everything I put you through, you're Emma's mother. She needs you to be stable and secure. If I can help with that occasionally, I'm willing to. We talked for another hour, clearing the air about dozens of small wounds and misunderstandings that had built up over the years. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't comfortable, but it was necessary. When we hung up, I realized that forgiving Sandra had been as much for me as it was for her. Carrying around all that anger and resentment had been exhausting. Letting it go felt like setting down a heavy bag I'd been carrying for miles. 3 weeks later, Emma spent a week with me at the upstate property. We painted watercolors together, picked vegetables from my garden, and had long conversations about everything from her friends at school to her worries about her parents' divorce. "Grandma," she said one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, "I'm glad we're friends again." "Me too, sweetheart." "Are you happy living here instead of in Queens?" I thought about it for a moment. Was I happy? A year ago, happiness had seemed impossible. I had felt trapped, used, invisible, and alone. Now I was sitting on my own porch, in my own house, watching my granddaughter chase fireflies in the yard where 4 generations of my family had played. "Yes, Emma, I'm very happy." "Good, you look happy. You look like yourself again." Out of the mouths of babes. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and thought about everything that had brought me to this moment. The years of financial abuse, the manipulation, the courtroom battle, the separation from my grandchildren, the slow rebuilding of relationships. All of it had been necessary to get me to where I am today. I'm not the same woman I was 2 years ago. I'm stronger, more confident, clearer about my boundaries. I know my worth now, and I don't need other people's approval to validate it. The property that caused so much family drama is still mine. But now I share it gladly with grandchildren who appreciate it and understand its value. Tom visits sometimes, and we're slowly learning to relate to each other as adults rather than as dependent child and enabling mother. Ruth moved up from Queens 6 months ago and bought a house 3 streets over from mine. We see each other almost daily, and our friendship has become one of the most important relationships in my life. I've learned to love my own company in ways I never thought possible. I can spend entire days painting, reading, gardening, or just sitting quietly without feeling lonely or restless. I've made peace with solitude, but I've also learned to reach out when I want companionship. I've joined hiking groups and book clubs and volunteer organizations. I've made friends with my neighbors. I've created a community around myself that's based on mutual interest and genuine affection rather than obligation or guilt. The money questions that dominated my life for so many years have been resolved. I help Emma and Jake with specific needs: school trips, sports equipment, music lessons. But I don't provide general financial support to their parents. I've taught them all that my love is not for sale. More importantly, I've learned that being helpful and being used are two completely different things. I can offer assistance when I choose to, but I don't have to say yes to every request or justify every decision I make with my own money. Looking back, I can see that my biggest mistake wasn't giving too much money or trusting the wrong people. My biggest mistake was forgetting that I had value beyond what I could provide for other people. For 30 years, I had defined myself primarily as Tom's mother, Sandra's mother-in-law, and Emma and Jake's grandmother. Those relationships were important parts of who I was, but they weren't the whole story. I had lost track of Eleanor Patterson, the individual, the woman with her own dreams, interests, opinions, and desires. Getting that woman back was worth every difficult conversation, every legal battle, every lonely night, and every moment of doubt about whether I was doing the right thing. If there's one thing my story teaches, it's this: no one has the right to make you feel less than you are. Your worth is not determined by how much money you give away, how many favors you do, or how often you say yes when you want to say no. Your worth is inherent, and it belongs to you. You don't have to earn love from people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. You don't have to buy your place in your own family. You don't have to tolerate disrespect, manipulation, or abuse just because it's coming from relatives. Setting boundaries is not selfish. Protecting your assets is not cruel. Expecting basic courtesy and gratitude is not unreasonable. And sometimes, walking away from toxic relationships, even with family members, is the most loving thing you can do for everyone involved. I spent too many years believing that keeping the peace was more important than keeping my dignity. I thought that being the bigger person meant always giving in, always sacrificing, always putting other people's wants ahead of my own needs. Now I understand that real love, the kind worth having, doesn't require you to diminish yourself. Real love sees you, values you, and treats you with respect. Real love doesn't come with a price tag or a list of conditions. Have you ever lived something like this? Have you ever felt invisible in your own family, reduced to a source of money or favors, rather than a person deserving of love and respect? Have you ever found yourself giving and giving and giving until you forgot that you were worth something just for being you? Please share your story in the comments below. Let me know that I'm not alone in this experience, and let others know that they're not alone either. And if you felt something today while listening to my story, if it resonated with your own experiences or helped you see a difficult situation in a new light, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. It will help me keep opening my heart and sharing these stories. Together we can remind each other that we are worth more than what we can provide for other people. Together we can learn to protect our hearts, our dignity, and our dreams. Together, we can choose relationships that lift us up rather than tear us down. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for seeing me. And remember, you are valuable, you are worthy, and you deserve to be treated with love and respect. Your story matters too.